Looks like it's time for another Kerbal Space Program mission in which it's crewed this time. Yes, of course it is. It's an actual mission. And remember how I built all those rockets in the previous video? Yeah, we're not using those. Nope, not a single bit. So, what are we doing today? Well, what we're doing today is we are going to Minmus's North Pole. Why? Well, because why not? And I'm still too scared to do a return mission from Duna. I was gonna add some deployable science, but decided against it. Just thought it looked kind of dumb. So we're gonna be putting some landing legs on this lander. This lander actually is pretty good. If you're going to Minmus for the first time, you can use it to puddle hop. Gonna be adding some solar panels. There's electricity. There's some lights on there. Because if you didn't know, you might not have known this, but the poles are actually quite dark. So we're adding some lights so that we can make sure that we can see while our Kerbals are on EVA. The second stage is actually going to be able to do our inclination change and is going to get us into a stable orbit, our inclination change, and then it's going to be able to deorbit itself with that extra fuel tank right there. So we're going to be adding the Wolfhound engine because I absolutely am in love with the engine. The biggest fuel tank, and then some peripherally mounted kind of side boosters. We're gonna be these are not nearly as big as they normally would be. I'm only using the 2.5 meter rocket pieces because they're the only ones that look good with Minmus stuff or with the Minmus lander. So fuel lines because onion staging is the most efficient setup for this. Then we're adding those normal fuel tanks I add because I like to throttle up my engines. It was a trick I found out, and I quite like it. We're also going to be adding some struts to it, you know, a bit of extra realism, as well as we're going to strut it to the bottom. Then we're going to stage it correctly, as well as you might notice that Sepratron on the nose cone of one of the, we're just building the payload fairing. I decided to make quite a blunt payload fairing. I thought it looked cool. But those Separatrons are there to help make sure that the side boosters are able to successfully detach, which is wonderful. So we're going to time warp to morning, and then we're going to launch our rocket. Now this mission says it took quite a while, but that's because I didn't launch at a good opportune time to get to Minmus, because unlike the Mun, it's on a very tilted orbit. It's actually pretty difficult to get a maneuver node without playing with normal and anti-normal, and I played around with it quite a lot, and I just decided to wait. Also, you might notice we have Bill in there instead of Jebediah or Val, and that was completely unintentional. I'm gonna be honest here, it wasn't intentional. I wanted to bring Val. I thought it'd be cool to bring Val. You know, Val gets overlooked quite a lot. You know, you got the core three. You got Bob, Bill, and Val. Or Jeb. And then you got Val, who nobody ever talks about, you know? But I think Val deserves as much love as all of the other Kerbals get, so I was going to send her to Minmus. But that didn't happen because of my own stupidity. As you can see, we're going to be doing this. Also, there's a little bug that happens in which the rocket kind of starts to shake, which is an opportune time for the Kraken to strike. Which is why I finally decided to figure out what's going wrong. It turns out what was wrong with it was physics range extender. That's what was wrong with it. So I'm trying to figure out where I can get an encounter, but I keep getting an encounter with the moon. So unfortunately, we're going to end up time warping so I can get a nice encounter with Minmus. Also, Minmus's gravity well is very small, but it's quite easy to get an encounter with. You might be asking, but why? Why is it so easy to get an encounter with? Well, that's because, for the same reason why Elu is actually very easy to get an encounter with, because it's so far away from anything. You see, Elu is so far away from anything else's gravity well that anything that ends up in its orbit will probably end up in its sphere of influence, and then possibly get into an orbit if it captures. And then, it's the same thing with Minmus, as well as a lot of planets on Earth, like the reason why Pluto, the smallest planet, I think, because recently it was reclassified as a planet, it has, because it's so far away from everything, it has 5 moons, which is quite a lot, especially for the size. But that's because it is the only thing in the area. It's quite interesting, actually. Also, I just had a thought. I wonder if there's planets out there whose moons have moons. Like, trying to think of any here. I don't think there are any. Correct me if I'm wrong, but moons of moons. That sounds very interesting. Let's just say that. So we're gonna time warp around, and we're gonna doing our burn. So we're doing the full burn, and then the mid-course correction burn is going to get us to our polar orbit, and then to the correct orbit that we want. So we're gonna be using normal, and then we're gonna kind of just play with it because we want this to be as polar as possible. Because I decided to try to use that kind of maneuver node thing, but it's very difficult to use precisely. So I just figured it's easier to use those nodes. So we're just trying to get the right perfect position using protograde and retrograde. There we go. That's a nice orbital line. Also, unlike the moon's poles, Minmus's poles are actually very flat. They're a bit hilly, but they're not nearly as rough as the rest of Minmus. Now, of course, they're not as smooth as the greater flats, which are those kind of, what's the correct word? I guess, like, I really don't know what the correct word for those are. The color, it's like turquoise, but the rest of the planet's the darker turquoise. It's also once we so as you can see, we're actually going to detach from the second stage there quite shortly. In fact, our entire circularization, I think, is completed with the lander. Or is it completed with the first stage? I forget. Exactly what. Okay, so yeah, we're doing it with the second stage. So this is more N1, I believe. Yeah, the N1 moon rocket. It used its second stage to capture at the moon. Then we're gonna ditch it, and we're gonna point retrograde. And I actually overshot my burn slightly. And then, as you can see, so I just warped over to apoapsis, and then burned what little delta V we had remaining. Luckily, we had just enough. As you can see, 2 meters per second left. Now, sadly, we're not going to get to watch the giant explosion. Of course, I could have, but we have a mission to do, and that's a moment to spare. So we're going to start the orbit burn. We're pretty much going to want to slow right down, so we're going to be going straight. Why? Because, well, the poles, yes, they're quite big, but they're also quite small when they're completely surrounded by midlands. Now, midlands are not a bad thing. We don't have the biome stuff, we don't have the scientific data from the midlands, but I decided against going there and puddle hopping because I was scared I was gonna break the land, or I'm gonna be honest here. And then we're going to do our landing shortly here, and as you can see, very successful. I'm trying to keep us going at 0 meters per second. I thought that was a kind of cool shot with curve in the background, so you can see the GUI pull away for just a second. And oh, the eagle has landed. I don't think that's the correct word. Anyway, we're gonna do all our scientific experiments, and then we're gonna get Bob out on an EVA, an extravehicular activity. So we're going to do an EVA report, take a surface sample. I'm going to plant the Aerospace flag. Now, as for all my flags in this mission, I always put the crew names on there. And then we're going to jump out with Bob, head on down there, and we're going to stand him right next to the flag, and then we're going to get our nice thumbnail picture. What a beautiful shot. But, not a moment to waste. As you see, Bob wanted to try his bit of his EVA skills. In reality, I just wanted to try them. But we're gonna grab onto the ladder, maybe, eventually. And then I'm gonna grab the data. And we were gonna warp around. I don't know why I warped around. It's not gonna be the time is gonna be different. There. Now we're gonna have the scientific data. It's gonna look much faster than it actually is. Do not attempt to grab scientific data going this fast. This is at ×4 speed. And there we go. We got our scientific data, so we can climb on back up to the, I think that's the Gemini style capsule. You know, launch away. Also, you might remember from the build process that that ladder is actually offset. There's good reason for that. You see, if we just put that straight onto the capsule, it would actually be attached to the capsule. And we want that to go when we want that to go when we separate from the transfer stage. Now, we're in our orbit, and now we are going to pull our orbit away using normal and anti-normal. Those are the two correct nodes for this. Bit of retrograde and protograde both work as well. But since we're on a polar orbit, we will also be going at a polar orbit when we re-enter Kerbin. And now, start our burn. Now because, once again, polar orbit, we're actually going to be on a collision course if we don't complete our burn. But, of course, we will complete our burn. And that's just a side effect from being in polar orbit. We could have probably went up, then time warped around to get to the South Pole, and then went to the South Pole and gathered more scientific data. Looking back on it, that would have been the more sensible approach, since we still would have had plenty of delta V, considering our 1,283 meters per second, I believe. So we still would have had plenty of delta V to get home. You need about 800 meters per second if you want to, if you're not doing aero captures. I don't know how much it is if you are doing aero capturing. Let's just say, so to get from low Kerbin orbit to an ecliptical, an encounter or an intercept with Minmus, it's 930 meters per second of delta V. And then it's about 160 to circularize, and then 180 to land. So we would have had plenty to get back to Kerbin. Yeah, I don't know what else to commentate about. We're going to be landing near a city, and you might be wondering, but Ren, how do you get those cities? Well, it's actually a mod. What mod? I can't remember. It's from one of the visual mods I use. And we're actually going to be unlocking the RTG node, which is going to be important because of a very important mission. We're actually going to be, our next mission